The grand chamber of the Valorian Dominion stretched for nearly 3 kilometers, its vaulted ceilings disappearing into artificial clouds that mimicked the homeworld's perpetual overcast skies. Holographic star maps flickered between the massive obsidian columns, each point of light representing a system under Valorian control. There were thousands of them, spanning 6 spiral arms of the galaxy. Supreme Commander Thvex stood at the central podium, his scaled hide reflecting the blue luminescence of the tactical displays surrounding him. Behind him, the Council of Hierarchs sat in ascending tiers, their ancient forms draped in ceremonial robes that denoted millennia of conquered civilizations. "We have identified a new species," Thvex announced, his voice carrying through the chamber with practiced authority. "Designation: humanity. Origin: Sol 3, a modest planet in the outer territories of the Orion Arm." The display shifted, revealing a blue-green world spinning slowly in the void. Around it, primitive satellites cluttered low orbit, and a handful of rudimentary vessels crawled between the planet and its single gray moon. Hierarch Veloxis leaned forward, his withered face twisting with what passed for amusement among his kind. "Another primitive species? They appear to have barely mastered local space travel. Why do you waste the Council's time with such insignificance?" "Because, Hierarch, they possess something we have not encountered in over 12,000 cycles of expansion." The Vex manipulated the display, and the image zoomed to show one of humanity's vessels in detail. They are fractured, divided. They war among themselves constantly, yet they continue to advance. Their technological progression defies all established models. Hierarch Kesoth, the eldest of the Council, stirred from his contemplation. "Explain." "We have observed this species for approximately 40 of their orbital cycles. In that time, they have progressed from chemical propulsion to prototype fusion drives, from primitive computing machines to rudimentary artificial intelligence, from simple projectile weapons to directed energy systems. This rate of advancement is unprecedented." "Impossible," Veloxis scoffed. "Our own ascension took 50,000 cycles to achieve comparable development. No species advances so quickly." "And yet they do," Thvex replied. "More concerning, they do so while simultaneously engaging in perpetual conflict. Their planet hosts over 200 separate governing bodies, many of which actively oppose one another. They expend resources on internal warfare that should cripple any developing civilization, yet they continue to grow." The Council murmured among themselves. The Valorian Dominion had encountered over 3,000 spacefaring species in their long history. All had followed predictable patterns of development: unity preceding advancement, peace enabling progress. This species appeared to operate on entirely different principles. "What is your recommendation?" Kesoth asked. The Vex straightened. "Early intervention. We should integrate them into the Dominion now, while they remain manageable. In another century, at their current rate of progression, they may become complicated." The vote was unanimous. The Valorian Dominion would welcome humanity into its embrace, whether humanity wished it or not. General Vortekis received his orders with the cool professionalism expected of a decorated military commander. 40 cycles of service, 12 successful integration campaigns, and not a single failure on his record. He had broken the Cressian Collective when they resisted annexation. He had crushed the temporal heresy of the Nth Colony. He had personally led the assault on the fortress world of Gorvanus Prime, a campaign that military academies still studied as the perfect example of overwhelming force application. But as he reviewed the intelligence files on humanity, something stirred in his chest that he had not felt in decades: uncertainty. "Computer, replay the historical analysis," he commanded. The display in his private quarters flickered to life, showing a compressed timeline of human history. He had watched it 17 times now, and each viewing disturbed him more than the last. The species had nearly destroyed itself on multiple occasions. They had developed weapons capable of rendering their world uninhabitable, then somehow refrained from using them. They had fractured into ideological camps that seemed irreconcilable, yet continued to coexist. They had committed atrocities against their own kind that would shame the most brutal of Valorian suppression campaigns, yet simultaneously produced works of art and philosophy that spoke of transcendent hope. They made no sense. "Display military conflict analysis," Vortekis ordered. The screen filled with data, humanity's recorded wars, battles, and skirmishes. The numbers were staggering. In just the last century of their recorded history, they had engaged in over 100 significant armed conflicts. Millions of their own kind had perished. Cities had burned. Entire populations had been displaced. And through it all, they had continued to advance. The general studied the tactical assessments with growing unease. Human warfare was chaotic, unpredictable, and astonishingly creative. They employed strategies that violated every principle of rational conflict. They fought when logic dictated surrender. They sacrificed themselves for objectives that held no strategic value. They adapted to new threats with a speed that bordered on instinctive. Most troubling of all, they improved with every conflict. Each war made them more effective, more dangerous, more capable. It was as if conflict itself was the fuel for their advancement. "Computer, display projected integration timeline." The estimate appeared: 18 standard cycles for complete pacification, assuming standard resistance patterns. Vortekis dismissed the display with a wave of his clawed hand. The computer's projections were based on models developed from integrating passive species, civilizations that had achieved peace before reaching the stars. Humanity did not fit those models. But orders were orders. The Dominion had commanded integration, and integration would occur. The first contact fleet assembled at the edge of the Sol system, far beyond the detection range of human sensors. 1,200 vessels of various classes, from nimble interceptors to massive dreadnoughts, their combined firepower sufficient to reduce continents to ash. Vortekis stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Judgment, watching the distant yellow star that humanity called Sun. Somewhere in the orbital mechanics of that unremarkable stellar body, a species that should not exist was going about its daily existence, unaware that its future had already been decided by beings they had never met. "General, the fleet is in position," his second-in-command reported. "All vessels report ready status." "Initiate the broadcast," Vortekis ordered. Across every frequency that human technology could receive, the message played. It had been translated into the 17 most common human languages, a gesture of courtesy that the Dominion extended to all species facing integration. "Inhabitants of Sol 3, you are now within the protective sphere of the Valorian Dominion. We come to offer you inclusion in a galactic community that spans countless worlds. Resistance is unnecessary and will be met with proportional response. Representatives will arrive at your orbital coordinates within 6 of your planetary rotations. Prepare to receive them." the message repeated on a continuous loop, broadcasting to every corner of the blue world. Vorticus waited for the response he had witnessed in every previous integration: panic, confusion, and ultimately resignation. Primitive species always followed the same pattern. They would posture, they would protest, and they would submit. But as the hours passed and human communications channels exploded with activity, the general began to realize that humanity would not follow the pattern. "They're debating," Sub-Commander Kreth reported, his tone confused. "Their governing bodies are arguing about how to respond." "That is expected," Vorticus replied. "All species require time to accept the reality of contact." "No, General, you misunderstand. They are not debating whether to comply. They are debating whether to attack us." Vorticus turned from the viewport. "Explain." Kreth manipulated the communications display, and a cascade of translated transmissions filled the bridge. Political leaders argued not about surrender terms, but about strategic options. Military commanders discussed not defensive positions, but assault vectors. Scientists debated not how to appease the newcomers, but how to analyze and counter their technology. "This is impossible," Kreth breathed. "They are a Type 0.7 civilization at best. They have no capacity to threaten our fleet. Yet they speak of war as if they believe they could win." Vorticus studied the transmissions with growing fascination. The humans were not posturing, or rather, they were not only posturing. Beneath the expected diplomatic maneuvering, something else was happening. Laboratories across their world were already analyzing the carrier wave of the Dominion's broadcast, attempting to reverse engineer the technology. Factories were shifting production schedules. Military forces were repositioning. They were preparing to fight. "General, we are detecting unusual energy signatures from the planet's surface," the sensor officer reported. "Multiple sources, concentrated in what appears to be industrial regions." "Identify." "Unknown. The patterns do not match any weapon systems in our database. They appear to be adapting their infrastructure in real time." Vorticus felt that unfamiliar sensation again, uncertainty, crystallizing into something closer to concern. How is that possible? They received our broadcast less than 10 standard time units ago. "I cannot explain it, General, but the energy output of their industrial base has increased by 47% since our transmission. They are building something." The general turned back to the viewport, staring at the distant blue dot. "What are you?" he murmured to himself. The diplomatic shuttle arrived at the designated coordinates precisely 6 planetary rotations after the initial broadcast, as promised. The Valorian delegation consisted of Ambassador Vexthul, a career negotiator who had overseen the peaceful integration of dozens of species, and an escort of 20 armed guards. The human vessel that met them was a patchwork construction, clearly assembled from whatever components had been available. It was ugly, inefficient, and bristling with weapons that should not have existed. "Ambassador, the human vessel is hailing us," the shuttle pilot reported. "Accept the communication." The display flickered, and a human face appeared. It was pale, with dark eyes and darker hair, wearing what appeared to be a military uniform. A small metal rectangle on the uniform bore symbols that the translation matrix identified as a name: General Marcus Chen. "Valorian vessel," the human said, his voice flat. "You have entered sovereign territory of the United Earth Defense Coalition. State your intentions or withdraw." Ambassador Vexthul blinked his secondary eyelids in confusion. I believe there has been a misunderstanding. We are here to negotiate the terms of your integration into the Valorian Dominion. This is a formality. Your inclusion has already been determined by the Council of Hierarchs. The human's expression did not change. Then the Council of Hierarchs can go fuck themselves. The translation matrix struggled briefly with the idiom before providing an approximate interpretation. Vexthul's scales flushed with color, the Valorian equivalent of shocked outrage. "You dare!" "I dare quite a lot," General Chen interrupted. "We have analyzed your transmission, Ambassador. We have studied your fleet's energy signatures. We have run simulations on your likely technological capabilities. And we have concluded that while your forces significantly outmatch our current capabilities, the gap is not insurmountable." "You are delusional. Our fleet could reduce your planet to cinders within hours." "Probably," Chen agreed. "But you won't. Because in 6 days, we have already developed countermeasures for 3 of your primary weapon systems. Given 6 months, we will have counters for all of them. Given 6 years, we will have surpassed them. You can destroy us, Ambassador, but you cannot conquer us. And destroying us would cost you far more than you're willing to pay." Vexthul sputtered. "This is preposterous. You have had less than 1 of your planetary weeks to analyze technology that took our civilization millennia to develop." "Yes," Chen said, "and we've made remarkable progress. Would you like a demonstration?" Before the ambassador could respond, alarms shrieked throughout the shuttle. The pilot's voice cut through the cacophony. "Ambassador, multiple weapons locks! The human vessel is targeting our engines!" "This is an outrage! You would fire on diplomatic—" The shuttle lurched as something struck its hull. For a terrifying moment, Vexthul believed the humans had opened fire. Then the pilot's voice came again, confused. "Ambassador, they've attached something to our vessel. It appears to be broadcasting." On the display, General Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "That device is currently transmitting every word of our conversation to every communications network on Earth. 7 billion humans are watching this exchange, Ambassador. They're watching you threaten our world. They're watching you dismiss our capacity to resist. And they're learning." Vexthul felt something cold settle in his primary circulatory organ. "What do you hope to accomplish with this?" "Unity," Chen replied. "You wanted to know what would happen if you threatened humanity? This is what happens. We stop fighting each other and start fighting you. Every scientist, every engineer, every soldier, every factory worker on this planet is now dedicated to a single purpose: ensuring that you never threaten us again." "We are not threatening you. We are offering you the benefits of—" "Spare me. I've studied your integrations. Subjugation dressed in diplomatic language is still subjugation. You want to absorb humanity into your empire. We decline." "The Council will not accept a refusal." "Then the Council will have to come and take us by force. And every day they delay is another day we have to prepare, another day we have to learn, another day we have to grow." The communication terminated abruptly. The shuttle's sensors registered the human vessel withdrawing, but not before launching a final package that attached itself to the shuttle's hull. "What is that?" Vexthul demanded. The pilot analyzed the readings. "It appears to be data. They've attached a storage device containing information." "What kind of information?" I I do not know how to interpret this, Ambassador. It appears to be their historical records. Everything. Their wars, their atrocities, their achievements, their failures. They have given us their entire history. Vex Thule stared at the display where the human had been. Why would they do that? There is an attached message, the pilot said. It reads, "Know us, understand us, and decide if you truly want to make enemies of us." The data package from the human vessel sat in Vortakis's personal quarters, its contents transferred to his secure terminal. He had been studying it for 72 standard hours without rest, and what he had learned terrified him. Human history was a chronicle of violence that made the Dominion's expansion campaigns look gentle by comparison. They had butchered each other with industrial efficiency, developing ever more creative methods of inflicting death. They had committed genocide against their own subspecies, a concept so alien to Valorian psychology that Vortakis had required hours to comprehend it. But it was not the violence that frightened him. Violence was a tool, and the general was intimately familiar with its applications. What frightened him was the resilience. Every catastrophe that should have destroyed humanity had instead made them stronger. They had survived ice ages and plagues, famines and floods. They had endured dictatorships that made the Dominion's administrative structure look benevolent. They had inflicted wounds upon themselves that should have been fatal, then risen from the ashes with renewed determination. They had even split the atom, discovered the fundamental forces of creation, and their first instinct had been to weaponize it. They had built devices capable of ending their own civilization and held them as bargaining chips against each other. For decades, they had lived on the edge of self-annihilation, and somehow, incomprehensibly, they had not fallen. General, the Council requests an update on the integration timeline, his communications officer reported. Vortakis did not look up from the display. Tell them I am still assessing the tactical situation. General, the Council grows impatient. They do not understand the delay. Neither do I, Vortakis admitted. But rushing this operation would be unwise. He returned his attention to the data. The human who had contacted the diplomatic shuttle, General Chen, had included a personal addendum to the historical records. It was a message addressed directly to whoever led the Valorian forces. "I know you're watching," the message read. "I know you're analyzing, and I know you're trying to understand why we would share our darkest secrets with a potential enemy. Here's your answer. We have nothing to hide. We are exactly what we appear to be. We are broken, we are flawed, and we are dangerous. Not because we are powerful. We are not, by your standards. We are dangerous because we refuse to stop. Every time we should have failed, we adapted. Every time we should have surrendered, we fought. Every time we should have died, we survived. And now we face our greatest challenge, an empire that spans the galaxy, that has crushed countless civilizations, that could destroy us without significant effort. And do you know what humanity is feeling right now? Excitement. We've been waiting for this. We've been preparing for this, even if we didn't know it. Every war, every conflict, every struggle, it was all training for this moment. You are not our doom. You are our test. And humanity does not fail tests. Vortakis read the message again, then a third time. He had commanded fleets, conquered worlds, and broken empires. He had never encountered anything like this species. "General," his aide interrupted, "we are receiving reports from the surveillance drones in the Sol system. Human activity has increased dramatically." "Show me." The display shifted to sensor data from the automated probes the Dominion had seeded throughout the system. What Vorticus saw made his secondary hearts stutter. In the 10 planetary days since first contact, humanity had launched over 300 new vessels into orbit. Their manufacturing capacity had increased by a factor of 8. New installations were appearing on their moon and on the 4th planet of their system. Most troubling of all, the energy signatures from these new constructions matched nothing in Valorian databases. "They're building weapons," Vorticus breathed. "They're building weapons we've never seen before."
"How is that possible, General? They are primitives. They should not be capable of this level of innovation."
"They are not primitives," Vorticus said slowly. "We made an error in our assessment. We measured their technology against our standards and found them lacking. But technology is not their strength. Their strength is adaptation. Their strength is their refusal to accept limitations." He stared at the display, watching the swarm of new human vessels taking up defensive positions around their homeworld. How many ships could we lose in an assault on that planet? "Current projections estimate minimal casualties, General, perhaps 3 to 5% of the fleet."
Update those projections with the assumption that human technology will continue to advance at the current rate throughout the conflict.
The computer processed the new parameters. When the results appeared, Vorticus felt his scales go cold. That cannot be correct," his aide stammered. "The projection indicates potential fleet losses of 40 to 60% within the first cycle of combat."
And if the conflict extends beyond the first cycle?
The projections become unstable. The computer cannot model human technological advancement with any reliability. Their rate of innovation exceeds all known parameters. Vorticus turned from the display. "Open a channel to the Council of Hierarchs. I must speak with them immediately." The council did not take the news well. "You are telling us," Hierarch Veloxis snarled, "that a species that has not even achieved reliable interplanetary travel poses a significant threat to the Valorian Dominion?" "I am telling you," Vorticus replied, keeping his voice steady, "that this species does not conform to any model we have established. They advance under pressure. They innovate in crisis. They adapt to threats faster than we can predict." "Then we eliminate them quickly," Veloxis declared. "A full planetary bombardment. We have done it before." "And we could do it again," Vorticus agreed. "But I would ask the Council to consider the implications. This species has existed in its current form for approximately 300,000 of their orbital cycles. In that time, they have progressed from stone tools to nuclear weapons. They have achieved space travel within a single lifetime of their more recent technological development. They have done this while fractured into hundreds of competing groups, while expending enormous resources on internal conflict, while operating under conditions that should have ensured their extinction." "Your point?" Kessoff asked. "My point is that we have never encountered a species with this level of adaptive capacity. Destroying them eliminates a threat, yes, but it also eliminates an opportunity." The council murmured among themselves. Vorticus pressed forward. "Consider, what if we could harness this capacity? What if, instead of breaking humanity as we have broken other species, we could channel their potential? They could become the greatest asset the Dominion has ever acquired." "Or the greatest threat we have ever faced," Veloxis countered. "That is the risk, yes. But I have studied their history extensively. Humanity is not inherently hostile. They are merely relentlessly competitive. They fight among themselves because they have no one else to fight. Give them a common enemy, a common purpose, and they unite with terrifying effectiveness.
You propose to make us their ally?
I propose that we are cautious, that we observe before we act, that we attempt to understand this species before we attempt to subjugate them. If we attack now and fail to achieve complete annihilation, we will face them again in a generation, and they will be stronger, angrier, and far more dangerous. The council deliberated for several hours. In the end, they reached a compromise that pleased no one. You will have 60 planetary rotations, Kessoff announced. Use that time to gather intelligence, assess their capabilities, and develop a comprehensive integration strategy. If, at the end of that period, you believe peaceful integration is possible, we will pursue that course. If not, we will proceed with forced subjugation.
And if I determine that neither option is viable?
Kessoff's ancient eyes narrowed. Then we will discuss alternative measures. The 60-day observation period lasted exactly 12 days. It was not the humans who broke the standoff. It was a Valorian patrol vessel, the Vigilant Observer, whose commander made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. The Vigilant Observer was conducting a routine sensor sweep of the outer Sol system when it detected a human vessel approaching on an intercept course. The ship was small, clearly a civilian transport of some kind, broadcasting no weapons signatures. Commander Creswell, a young officer eager to prove himself, ordered the human vessel to halt and submit to inspection. The human vessel responded by increasing speed.
Fire a warning shot, Creswell ordered.
The Vigilant Observer's secondary batteries discharged, sending a bolt of plasma across the human vessel's bow. The ship should have stopped. Any rational species would have recognized the futility of resisting a clearly superior force. The human vessel launched a missile. It was a primitive weapon by Valorian standards, a simple chemical propulsion system with a crude explosive payload. The Vigilant Observer's point defense systems should have intercepted it easily. They did not. The missile's trajectory was erratic, random, almost chaotic, but the chaos was deliberate. It tumbled and spun in ways that confused the tracking algorithms, its course changing with each passing microsecond. By the time the defense systems computed a firing solution, the missile had already struck. The explosion should not have penetrated the Vigilant Observer's shields. But the warhead was not a conventional explosive. It was something else, something the Valorians had never encountered. A directed energy device that channeled the force of the blast into a focused beam of plasma, burning through the shield matrix and into the hull. The Vigilant Observer lost 3 crew members in the initial impact. The subsequent internal fire killed 5 more before containment systems brought it under control. In a single exchange, a primitive human transport had inflicted more casualties on a Valorian warship than some entire integration campaigns. Commander Creswell did not understand what had happened. He did not understand how a species that had barely achieved spaceflight could construct a weapon capable of damaging a vessel built by a civilization that had mastered the stars. He knew only one thing. He had been attacked, and he would respond.
"All batteries," he ordered, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "Destroy that vessel!"
The Vigilant Observer's weapon systems cycled to full power. Plasma cannons, beam projectors, and kinetic impactors locked onto the small human ship. In the space of seconds, the transport was reduced to expanding debris.
Creswell stared at the wreckage, his breathing ragged. "Report casualties and damage."
"Commander, we are receiving a transmission from the human homeworld."
"Put it through."
The face that appeared on the display was not General Chen. It was a woman, older, with gray hair and eyes that burned with controlled fury. The translation matrix identified her as President Yuki Tanaka, leader of the United Earth Defense Coalition's Executive Council. "Valorian vessel," she said, her voice steady. "You have destroyed a civilian transport carrying humanitarian supplies to our outer colonies. 43 crew members are confirmed dead, including 6 children." Cresval felt something cold grip his primary heart. "The vessel attacked us. We responded in self-defense." "The vessel launched a single defensive missile after you fired upon it. Your response was disproportionate by any civilized standard, but that is irrelevant now."
"What do you mean?"
Tanaka's eyes seemed to bore through the display. "What I mean, Commander, is that you have killed our people, and that act has consequences." "We are the Valorian Dominion. Your species is in no position to threaten." "We are not threatening you," Tanaka interrupted. "We are informing you. Humanity has tolerated your presence in our system. We have submitted to your demands for observation. We have endured your surveillance and your arrogance. But we will not endure the murder of our civilians." "This is war, then?" "No, Commander. This is a lesson." Tanaka's expression shifted, something ancient and terrible rising behind her eyes. "You need to understand what you've awakened. Every war we've ever fought has prepared us for this moment. Every conflict, every atrocity, every struggle for survival, all of it has forged us into what we are. You think of us as primitives, but we have been fighting and dying and evolving for longer than your dominion has existed. We have killed each other in numbers you cannot comprehend, and we have always survived." "You cannot possibly." "Can't I?" Tanaka smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "Look at your sensors, Commander. Look at what's happening in my system right now." Cresval turned to his tactical display. What he saw made his scales pale. Across the entire Sol system, human vessels were moving. Not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands. Ships of every size and configuration, rising from Earth and Mars and the moons of the outer planets. Most were civilian craft, transports, mining vessels, orbital platforms, but they were moving with military precision, coordinating with a speed that should have been impossible for a species without faster-than-light communication. How? "We don't need your technology to be effective, Commander. We've had to be resourceful our entire existence. We've had to make do with less, to improvise, to adapt. And right now, every human being in this system is adapting to the threat you represent. Every factory is shifting to war production. Every scientist is analyzing your technology. Every soldier is preparing to fight. Your fleet is composed of civilian vessels. They pose no military threat." "Not yet," Tanaka agreed. "But in a month? In 6 months? In a year? We learn fast, Commander. We build fast. And we never, ever give up." She leaned forward. "Go back to your generals. Tell them what happened here. Tell them that humanity has been pushed and humanity pushes back. And tell them this: if they want a war, we will give them a war, unlike anything they have ever experienced." The transmission ended. Commander Cresval stared at the tactical display, watching the swarm of human vessels forming up into something that looked disturbingly like battle formations. His claws trembled against the command console.
"Get me General Vortekis," he whispered. "Now."
Vortekis received the news with a cold resignation that surprised even himself. He had known, on some level, that peaceful resolution was never truly possible. The Council's patience was limited, and human nature was what it was.
But he had hoped for more time.
"The Council demands immediate action," his communications officer reported. "They view the destruction of the human transport as a hostile act, justifying full-scale intervention."
And the subsequent mobilization of human forces?
They view it as confirmation that humanity poses an unacceptable threat. Full planetary subjugation has been authorized, General. The fleet is to proceed immediately.
Vortekis stood at the viewport of the Eternal Judgment, watching the distant speck of light that was humanity's sun. Somewhere in that light, a species was preparing to fight for its survival. They had no hope of victory by any rational assessment. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and outnumbered. But rational assessments did not seem to apply to humanity.
General? His aide prompted.
"Prepare the fleet for combat operations," Vortekis ordered. "But we will not proceed with planetary bombardment. Not yet." "The Council's orders." "The Council is not here. I am. And I will not commit this fleet to a course of action without understanding the true nature of the threat we face." He turned from the viewport. "We will engage the human defensive forces. We will assess their actual combat capabilities. And only then will we determine the appropriate response." "With respect, General, this seems cautious. We have overwhelming superiority. A decisive strike now would create the possibility of survivors," Vortekis interrupted. "And that is something we cannot afford. If we attack humanity and fail to achieve complete annihilation, the survivors will carry the memory of what we did. They will pass that memory to their offspring and their offspring's offspring, and they will never stop fighting us." He pulled up the tactical display, showing the positions of both fleets. "We must be thorough. We must be precise. And we must understand exactly what we are fighting before we commit to destruction."
What if they prove stronger than we anticipate?
Vortekis did not answer immediately. He stared at the display, at the thousands of human vessels forming up around their homeworld. Most were converted civilian ships, armed with improvised weapons, and crewed by people who had never fought in space. By every metric, they should have been irrelevant.
But humanity had already demonstrated its capacity to exceed metrics.
"Then we adapt," he finally said. "That is what military commanders do." The Valorian First Contact Fleet advanced on the human defensive line in perfect formation, over 1,000 warships arranged in the classic spherical deployment pattern that had proven effective in 100 previous campaigns. Their weapons were charged, their shields were raised, and their crews were confident in their ultimate victory. The human fleet awaited them. From a purely numerical standpoint, the humans were not outmatched as severely as initial assessments suggested. Their mobilization efforts had produced nearly 3,000 vessels of various classes, though the vast majority were converted civilian ships with improvised armaments. The core of their defense was a mere 200 purpose-built warships, many of them constructed in the frantic weeks since first contact. General Vortekis studied the human formation from the bridge of the Eternal Judgment. It was unlike anything he had encountered. There was no clear hierarchy, no obvious command structure. The vessels seemed to move independently, yet coordinated with uncanny precision.
"Analysis?" he demanded.
Their formation defies standard tactical modeling, General. Each vessel appears to be operating autonomously, yet they respond to threats as a unified force. We cannot identify a command vessel because there does not appear to be one.
Distributed command structure, Vortekis murmured. They eliminate single points of failure by eliminating centralized control.
Is that not inefficient?
By our standards, yes, but it makes them unpredictable. We cannot target their command structure because the command structure is everywhere and nowhere. He considered the implications. They've been fighting each other for millennia. They've had time to develop doctrines we've never imagined.
General, we are approaching optimal engagement range. Shall we open fire?
Vortekis hesitated. Some instinct, honed by decades of combat, screamed warnings in the back of his mind. This felt wrong. It felt like a trap. But the Council demanded action, and he could not delay indefinitely.
All vessels, engage at will. Target their military vessels first. Try to disable rather than destroy. I want prisoners for interrogation. The Valorian fleet opened fire.
What followed would become known in human histories as the First Battle of Seoul, and it would be studied by military academies for centuries to come, not because of its tactical brilliance, but because of its unprecedented chaos. The initial Valorian salvo was devastating. Human vessels exploded by the dozens, their improvised armor no match for Valorian plasma cannons. In the opening minutes, over 200 human ships were destroyed or disabled. But the humans did not break. Instead, they adapted. The surviving human vessels scattered, abandoning any pretense of formation. They dove into the debris fields created by their destroyed comrades, using the wreckage as cover. They accelerated to speeds that should have been impossible for their primitive engines, pushing their systems far beyond safe operational parameters. And then they counterattacked.
The weapons they deployed were nightmarish in their creativity. Nuclear warheads modified to produce directed electromagnetic pulses that crippled Valorian sensor systems. Kinetic impactors made of dense metal slugs accelerated to relativistic velocities. Swarms of microdrones that attached themselves to Valorian hulls and began cutting through armor with industrial lasers.
None of these weapons should have been effective against Valorian shields, but the humans had studied those shields during the weeks of standoff, analyzed their frequency patterns, and developed countermeasures specifically designed to exploit their weaknesses. "General, we're losing ships," the tactical officer reported, his voice cracking with disbelief. "The human weapons are penetrating our defenses."
"Impossible. Our shields are—"
"Their weapons are modulating frequencies in real time. They're adapting to our shield harmonics faster than we can adjust them." Vortekis watched the tactical display with growing horror. Red icons indicating damaged or destroyed Valorian vessels were multiplying across the screen. The humans were not winning. They were still being slaughtered at a ratio of nearly 10 to 1, but they were inflicting losses that should have been impossible. "General, we've lost contact with the Righteous Fury," the communications officer announced. "And the Hammer of Justice. And, General, we're receiving distress signals from across the fleet. Human boarding parties are—" "Boarding parties?" The display shifted to show a visual feed from one of the affected vessels. What Vortekis saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Human soldiers in primitive-powered armor were cutting their way through Valorian bulkheads with plasma torches. They moved with a ferocity that bordered on madness, ignoring injuries that should have been incapacitating. When they ran out of ammunition, they resorted to improvised weapons. When their weapons failed entirely, they used their hands. The Valorian crew were not warriors. They were spacers, trained to operate systems and maintain vessels. They had never faced enemies willing to engage in close combat, and they had no idea how to respond.
The humans did not take prisoners.
"Pull back," Vortekis ordered, his voice barely audible. "All vessels, pull back immediately."
General, we're still winning the exchange rate. If we continue...
"We are not winning anything," Vortekis snarled. "We are bleeding, and they are learning. Every minute we remain engaged, they analyze our tactics and develop counters. Every vessel we lose gives them more wreckage to study. Every casualty we inflict teaches them where our defenses are weak." He stared at the tactical display, at the chaos that had consumed his orderly battle plan. "We came here to subjugate a primitive species. We found something else entirely." The Valorian fleet withdrew, leaving behind over 100 destroyed vessels and thousands of dead crew members. It was the worst single engagement loss in Dominion history. And the humans were just getting started. The aftermath of the First Battle of Sol sent shockwaves through the Valorian Dominion. The Council of Hierarchs convened emergency sessions, debating responses that ranged from immediate planetary bombardment to complete withdrawal from the Sol system. Vortekis stood before them once again, bearing the weight of a defeat that should have been impossible. "You promised us a manageable integration," Hierarch Veloxis accused. "Instead, you have given us a disaster." "I promised nothing," Vortekis replied. "I warned the Council that this species was unlike anything we had encountered. I recommended caution. I was overruled." "You are the military commander. The failure is yours." "The failure belongs to all of us. We underestimated humanity. We treated them as primitives when they are anything but. And now we face a choice. We can continue down this path, committing more forces to a conflict that will only make them stronger, or we can reconsider our approach entirely." "You suggest retreat?" "I suggest wisdom. The humans have demonstrated capacity for technological adaptation that exceeds anything in our experience. In the weeks since first contact, they have developed weapons capable of threatening our vessels. If we give them months, years, decades, what will they develop then?" "All the more reason to eliminate them now, while we still can." "Can we?" Vortekis challenged. "Can we truly be certain of eliminating every human being, every human ship, every human colony? Because if even a handful survive, they will remember what we did. They will carry that memory across generations, and they will never stop coming for us." The council fell silent. It was Kesoth who finally spoke. "What would you propose, General?" Vortekis took a deep breath. "I propose that we leave humanity alone." The chamber erupted in outraged protests. Vortekis waited for the noise to subside before continuing. "Not forever, not in surrender, but in recognition of a truth we have been unwilling to face. Humanity is not a species to be conquered. They are a species to be managed, contained, and eventually, perhaps, allied." "Allied? With primitives who slaughter their own kind?" "With a species that has demonstrated more adaptability in weeks than most civilizations develop in millennia. With a species that has turned our own technology against us after barely glimpsing it.
with a species that fights with a ferocity we have never encountered and a creativity we cannot match. Vorticus pulled up a holographic display showing projections of human technological development. Our models predict that within 50 cycles, humanity will achieve technological parity with the Dominion. Within 100 cycles, they will likely surpass us. We can either spend those cycles as their enemy, watching them develop weapons specifically designed to destroy us, or we can spend them as something else.
What would you have us be, General? Friends?
I would have us be survivors, Vorticus replied. The Valorian Dominion has endured for 12,000 cycles by recognizing when conflict is counterproductive. We have absorbed species, destroyed species, and occasionally, rarely, we have chosen to avoid species entirely. Humanity falls into that final category.
We have never retreated from a species as primitive as humanity.
We have never encountered a species as primitive as humanity that could bloody our fleet and make us question our assumptions. They are not what they appear to be. They are something new, something we do not understand. And until we understand them, we should not attempt to control them.
The council debated for hours. In the end, the vote was closer than anyone expected.
By a margin of 3, the council authorized a strategic withdrawal from the Sol system. The Valorian fleet departed Sol space 10 days after the first battle, their vessels battered and their pride wounded. General Vorticus remained behind, a single vessel orbiting the outer edges of the system. He had one final task to complete. The human vessel that approached his position was different from those he had faced in battle. It was sleek, clearly a purpose-built diplomatic craft, its lines suggesting both elegance and speed. It broadcast no weapons signatures, but Vorticus suspected it carried more than its appearance suggested.
General Vorticus, the communication channel crackled, this is Ambassador Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Defense Coalition. We have been authorized to accept your surrender.
Despite everything, Vorticus found himself amused. I am not surrendering, Ambassador. I am delivering a message.
A message?
May I come aboard your vessel? I believe what I have to say should be delivered in person.
There was a long pause. You would come alone?
I would. Another pause. Docking Bay 3. Any hostile action will result in your immediate destruction. I would expect nothing less. Ambassador Chen was younger than Vorticus expected, perhaps 40 cycles by human measurement. She had dark hair and sharp eyes that reminded him of General Marcus Chen, a relative, perhaps. She waited in a sparse conference room, flanked by 2 guards in combat armor. Vorticus entered alone, as promised. He carried no weapons, no devices, nothing but the weight of what he had come to say.
You've surprised us, General, Chen said. We expected the Dominion to continue its assault. Some of our analysts predicted planetary bombardment.
It was considered, Vorticus admitted, strongly considered. But I advocated for another approach.
Why? Vorticus settled into a chair designed for human physiology, finding it surprisingly comfortable. Because I have spent the past weeks studying your species, Ambassador. I have read your histories, analyzed your conflicts, observed your responses to our presence, and I have reached a conclusion that I am still struggling to accept.
Which is?
Humanity is the most dangerous species the Valorian Dominion has ever encountered.
Chen's expression did not change. We're aware of our reputation.
No, Ambassador, you misunderstand. You are dangerous not because of what you are, but because of what you could become. Every other species we have encountered has achieved a stable equilibrium, a point at which their technology and their society reach a balance and further advancement becomes incremental. Humanity has no such equilibrium. You advance constantly, relentlessly, driven by an internal competition that never ceases.
Some might call that a weakness. We've nearly destroyed ourselves more than once.
And yet you persist. That is what makes you dangerous. The Dominion could destroy your planet, eliminate 99% of your population, and the survivors would spend the next 10,000 cycles hunting us, not out of strategy, but out of spite. You are incapable of accepting defeat. You are incapable of surrendering. You are incapable of simply stopping.
Chen smiled slightly. You make us sound like monsters.
Not monsters. Something worse. You are evolution incarnate, change made flesh. You transform every obstacle into a stepping stone, every defeat into a lesson, every setback into motivation. We have conquered 1,000 species, Ambassador. We have never conquered one that refused to be conquered. So you're leaving. The fleet is leaving. I am here to deliver a warning.
To us?
No. Vorticus met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that looked almost like fear. To whoever comes after us. The Valorian Dominion is not the only power in this galaxy, Ambassador. There are others, older, stronger, more ruthless than we. When they learn of humanity's existence, they will come, and they will not be as cautious as we have been.
You expect us to be grateful for your restraint? I expect you to listen. The Dominion is withdrawing from your region of space. We will establish a perimeter at a distance of 100 light-years from your system. Any human vessel that crosses that perimeter will be considered hostile. But within that boundary, you are free to develop as you see fit. A quarantine zone. A buffer. A chance for humanity to grow without interference. And a warning to other powers that this region is complicated. Vorticus stood. In 100 cycles, perhaps 200, your species will be ready to take its place among the galactic community. When that day comes, I hope you will remember that the Valorian Dominion chose wisdom over destruction.
And if we decide to cross that perimeter before then?
Vorticus paused at the door. Then we will do what we must. But I suspect that by then, it will be you who shows mercy to us. He left without another word. Word of the Valorian retreat spread through the galaxy like a shockwave. For the first time in recorded history, the Dominion had withdrawn from a conflict without achieving its objectives. The explanation they offered, that humanity represented an unacceptable risk-to-reward ratio, satisfied no one. The galaxy's other powers smelled weakness. Within a decade, 3 separate civilizations sent reconnaissance missions to the Sol system, eager to see what kind of species could bloody the Dominion and survive. None of those missions returned. The Kreth Confederacy, a loose alliance of mercantile worlds, dispatched a fleet of 500 trading vessels to establish contact with humanity. They arrived to find a system transformed. Where primitive orbital stations had once orbited Earth, massive shipyards now churned out vessels that rivaled anything in the Confederacy's inventory. The human fleet that met them was not hostile, but it was clear that hostility would be met with overwhelming force. The Confederacy negotiated a trade agreement and departed peacefully. They also spread word that humanity was not to be trifled with. The collective of Nth, a hive mind species that had consumed over a dozen civilizations, viewed humanity as simply another meal. They arrived with an invasion force of 10,000 vessels, confident in their numerical superiority. The war lasted 3 years and ended with the collective's complete extermination. Humanity did not simply defeat the collective. They hunted it to extinction, tracking down every colony, every outpost, every hidden reserve. They developed weapons specifically designed to disrupt hive-mind communication, leaving individual collective units paralyzed and helpless. They showed no mercy, no hesitation, no restraint. When it was over, the collective was gone, and humanity had absorbed its technology. The third power to test humanity was the Dominion's ancient rival, the Transcendent Order of Vorix. The Order believed themselves to be the pinnacle of galactic evolution, beings of pure energy who had long ago abandoned physical form. They had watched the Dominion's retreat with contempt, viewing it as evidence that physical species were fundamentally weak. Their mistake was assuming that humanity's physicality was a limitation. The Order appeared in the Sol system as vast clouds of sentient energy, immune to conventional weapons and capable of disrupting electronic systems with a thought. They expected humanity to cower before beings of pure mind. Instead, humanity built traps. The details of the Vorix containment, as it came to be known, were never fully revealed to the wider galaxy. What was known was that humanity developed technology capable of capturing and imprisoning energy-based life forms, technology that should have been impossible for a species barely a century removed from their first moon landing. The Transcendent Order of Vorix was not destroyed. It was bottled, imprisoned in containment fields that humanity used as power sources for their ever-expanding civilization. Within a century of first contact with the Valorian Dominion, humanity had established itself as a power to be reckoned with. Their territory expanded outward at a rate that defied all projections, their technology advancing with each new challenge they encountered. And through it all, General Vorticus watched from the Valorian border, compiling reports that grew more alarming with each passing cycle. The Dominion has demanded an update on human expansion, Vorticus's aide reported. The Council is concerned. As they should be, Vorticus replied. He was old now, his scales fading to gray, but his mind remained sharp. Display the current territorial map. The hologram showed the galaxy as it had been a century earlier, with Valorian space dominating the core regions. But now a new color spread across the outer arms, the blue-green of human territory, expanding with each passing year. They've absorbed the Confederacy, the aide noted. Peacefully, apparently. The Confederacy chose to join them, rather than risk conflict. Wise of them. General, there are reports of human vessels operating within 50 light-years of the buffer zone. They have not crossed the perimeter, but they appear to be. Probing. Vorticus nodded slowly. They're testing our response. They want to know if we're still capable of enforcing the boundary. Are we? The old general did not answer immediately. He studied the map, tracing the blue-green expansion with his eyes. In a century, humanity had grown from a single system to an empire spanning thousands of worlds. They had defeated enemies the Dominion would have struggled to contain. They had developed technologies the Dominion could not replicate. And they remembered. Human diplomatic communications still referenced the First Battle of Sol. Their historians had preserved every detail of the Dominion's attempted subjugation.
Their military academies studied Valorian tactics not to understand them, but to counter them.
"We cannot enforce the boundary indefinitely," Vortekis finally said. "In another century, perhaps less, they will be stronger than us. When that day comes, they will cross the perimeter whether we wish it or not."
What do we do then?
"We hope that they remember the mercy we showed them." Vortekis turned from the display. "We hope that when they come to our worlds, they recall that we chose to leave them alone. And we pray that they are more forgiving than we have been."
And if they are not? Then the Valorian dominion will fall, and humanity will take its place among the stars. The old general smiled, a grim expression that held no warmth. But that is a problem for future generations. I have done what I could. I warned the council. I begged them to leave humanity alone.
He looked at the expanding blue-green tide on the map. They should have listened.
2 centuries after the Valorian retreat, General Marcus Chen IV stood on the observation deck of the Eternal Judgment, a vessel that had once belonged to the enemy, captured during a border skirmish and refitted to human standards. His great-great-grandfather's name was legend now, the ancestor who had first defied the Dominion. The Valorian homeworld hung in the viewport, a gray-green sphere surrounded by the wreckage of its once mighty defense fleet.
"Admiral, we've received a communication from the planetary surface," his aide reported. "They're requesting negotiations."
Marcus Chen IV nodded slowly. "Accept the communication." The hologram that appeared was ancient even by Valorian standards. A being so old that his scales had faded to near transparency, revealing the network of vessels beneath. But Marcus recognized him from the historical records.
"General Vortekis," he said, "you're still alive."
"Barely," the old Valorian admitted. "I have lived long enough to see my warnings vindicated and my people brought low. I assume you've come to complete what we started 200 years ago."
"We've come to accept your surrender," Marcus replied, "not to destroy you."
Vortekis's secondary eyelids flickered. Surprise, perhaps, or disbelief. "You would show mercy? After everything we attempted?" "Mercy is a choice, General. One your people made when you could have destroyed us." Marcus smiled. "You didn't have to retreat. You didn't have to establish the buffer zone. You could have glassed our planet and been done with it. But you chose another path." "I chose pragmatism, not mercy."
The result was the same. We survived. We grew. And now we're in a position to return the favor.
"Your people don't forget grudges. I've studied your history extensively. The descendants of your victims carry hatred for generations."
"You're right," Marcus agreed. "We don't forget. But we can choose what to do with our memories. We can choose whether they define us or whether we define them." He stepped closer to the hologram, his expression softening. 2 centuries ago, you could have ended humanity. You didn't. You warned us about the other powers that would come. You gave us time to prepare. That warning saved millions of human lives when the collective arrived.
"I was protecting Valorian interests."
"Maybe, but you still did it." Marcus straightened. "The Valorian Dominion is defeated. Your fleet is destroyed. Your empire is collapsing. We could finish you off. We have the power to do so. But we've decided on a different approach."
"Which is?"
"Integration. Not the kind you offered us. Not subjugation dressed in diplomacy. Real integration. Equal partnership. We're building something new, General. A galactic community based on cooperation rather than conquest. And we want the Valorians to be part of it."
Vortekis stared at him for a long moment. Your council approved this?
My council debated it for weeks. Some of them wanted blood. They remembered the transport you destroyed, the soldiers you killed, the threat you represented. But in the end, we chose to be better than our instincts. We chose to build instead of destroy.
Why? Marcus smiled again. Because that's what humans do. We fight, and we hate, and we remember everything. But we also forgive. We also move forward. We also choose hope over vengeance when we can.
Even for those who tried to enslave you?
Especially for those who tried and failed. Your failure taught us more about ourselves than any victory could have. It showed us that we could face extinction and survive. It showed us that our worst qualities, our aggression, our competitiveness, our refusal to accept defeat, could become our greatest strengths.
Marcus extended his hand toward the hologram, a gesture that had no physical meaning but carried symbolic weight. You begged your council to leave humanity alone, General. You saw what we could become before anyone else did. You saved your people from destruction by counseling restraint. Now we're offering you a chance to save them again, not through retreat, but through partnership.
And if we refuse?
Then we leave, and your empire continues to collapse under its own weight. But we won't be the ones to push you over the edge. That's not who we want to be.
Vortekis was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper.
I have lived for 300 cycles. I have commanded fleets and conquered worlds. I have seen species rise and fall, empires crumble and be born. But I have never seen anything like humanity. He raised his own hand, matching Marcus's gesture. 2 centuries ago, I warned my people that you were dangerous. I told them you would never stop fighting, never stop adapting, never accept defeat. I was right, but I was also wrong.
How so?
I thought your refusal to surrender made you terrifying. I understand now that it makes you hopeful. You refuse to accept defeat because you believe things can always be better. You refuse to stop fighting because you believe victory is always possible. And you refuse to hate forever because you believe in forgiveness. The old general's eyes met the young admiral's. You are the future, Admiral Chen. Not because you conquered us, but because you chose not to. That is a kind of strength I never understood.
Then help us build that future, Marcus said. Help us create something better than what came before. Not as subjects of the Dominion, not as conquerors of the Valorians, but as partners, as equals.
Vortekis nodded slowly. On behalf of the Valorian people, I accept your offer. May the galaxy be ready for what we create together.
The Galactic Archive of the United Species Federation contained records of every major event in the 1,000 years since humanity's first contact with the Valorian Dominion. Its databases held trillions of entries, documenting the rise of a civilization that now spanned a quarter of the galaxy. In a small chamber dedicated to historical reflection, a group of young beings from a dozen different species listened as an elderly human professor delivered the lecture that began every diplomatic training course.
Why do we study history? Professor Wei asked.
Not to glorify the past, but to understand how we arrived at the present. And no story better illustrates the nature of our Federation than the tale of humanity's first contact. She activated the holographic display, showing a battered but defiant Earth surrounded by Valorian warships. 1,000 years ago,
The Valorian Dominion declared that humanity would be absorbed into their empire. They had conquered 1,000 species. They had never failed. They expected us to submit as so many others had. The display shifted to show the first battle of Sol, the chaos of combat rendered in vivid detail. We did not submit. We fought with everything we had, converted cargo ships, improvised weapons, sheer determination. We were outmatched in every way that could be measured, yet we refused to accept defeat.
But humanity won that war, one of the students said, a young Valorian, her scales still bright with youth. My people retreated. We lost.
Your people chose wisdom over destruction, Professor Way corrected gently. General Vortekis, whose statue stands in the Hall of Founders on New Terra, convinced his council that humanity could not be conquered by force, that our capacity for adaptation made us too dangerous to fight and too valuable to destroy. He begged them to leave humanity alone, the Valorian student said, reciting from memory. Those words are inscribed on his memorial. Yes, and in doing so, he saved both our peoples. He gave humanity time to grow, and he gave the Valorians time to reconsider their approach to the galaxy. Professor Way smiled. When we finally met again, 2 centuries later, we chose to build rather than destroy. That choice defines everything we have become. The display shifted again, showing the modern Federation, a vast network of worlds and species, trading and cooperating across distances that would have seemed impossible to the first humans who looked up at the stars. What made humanity unique was not our strength or our technology. It was our refusal to accept limitations. We were told we could not defeat the Dominion, and we did. We were told we could not integrate with beings so different from ourselves, and we have. We were told that forgiveness was weakness, and we proved it was strength. Professor Way turned off the display. But humanity is not the story of our Federation. We are only part of it. Each of you represents a species that has contributed to what we have built. Each of you carries the heritage of beings who chose cooperation over conquest, partnership over domination. She looked at the assembled students, Valorians and humans, Confederates and Voreks, and a dozen other species who had joined the Federation over the centuries. 1,000 years ago, an alien general stood before his council and begged them to leave humanity alone. He did not know it then, but he was speaking not just for his people, but for the future of the galaxy. He was making a choice that would echo across centuries. Now it is your turn to make choices. You will become diplomats, negotiators, representatives of the Federation to species we have not yet encountered. You will face beings who do not understand us, who fear us, who may wish to destroy us. And you will have to decide, do we meet them with force or with patience? Do we demand submission or offer partnership? Professor Way smiled one last time. Remember the lesson of humanity's first contact. The universe is vast, and it contains more wonders than we can imagine. But the greatest wonder of all is the choice to be better than our instincts demand. That is what makes us who we are. That is what makes us worthy of the stars. The lecture ended, and the students filed out, each carrying with them the weight of history and the promise of the future. Among them, the young Valorian student paused at the doorway, looking back at the now empty chamber. She thought of Vortekis, the ancestor whose wisdom had saved her people. She thought of the humans who had shown mercy when they could have taken revenge. And she thought of the 1,000 years of cooperation that had grown from one alien general's decision to beg his council for caution. "Leave humanity alone," he had said. And from that plea, a civilization had been born.